I wanted to make sure that in the midst of that blast video there that you didn't miss, that we do in fact have a lead arts candidate. I have not forgotten about that. And so their names are, it's actually Jordan Bumgardner. He's our lead candidate. But the interesting thing is that his wife is just as equally talented as he is. And so she is, if this ends up working out, she will definitely be part of leading as well and an active part of the band and the arts team. So super exciting. So don't miss it. Make sure you're here. Bring your friends. It's going to be really, really awesome. All right? But before we go any further, don't start your stopwatch on me just yet. We're going to pray for Blast, and then you can start the clock. Okay? Ready? So let me pray for Blast. Father, we just pray for our students right now, God, as they're up there with leaders and they're waking up and they're having sessions, they're having encounter time with you, their quiet time with you, Jesus, and God, then they're going to have some breakouts and have some more sessions. Would you just show up in a real way, God? We praise you for how already students are saying yes to you, some for the first time, some just for their next steps of growth as a Christ follower. We ask that you would speak through the small groups and the music and the free time and the messages and all those different things, God. Would you give leaders the right words to say as they're spending that quality time with the students and the main speakers as well, God, that you would just give them a clear message. God, as we love our students, we want to see this generation continue to rise up and follow you. We want to see your dream for this generation and this world restored, God. We love you and we praise you. In your name, amen. It was super exciting. I went up there and already made it back, obviously, and so I was excited, just for lots of reasons. One, I just know these kind of events. There's tons of just energy and lights and music and all that kind of stuff, but then it was my first one, and so I really was, anxious to get up there, and so the plan was I was supposed to, follow the buses up, and I wasn't going to ride in the buses because I have served my time on those kind of buses already, and so I didn't feel like that was necessary. Plus, I had to come back early. So the plan was I was going to follow the buses and, go from there. So as I'm packing my stuff up, I'm saying goodbye to Eric and the kids, and I'm going, and I take off, and I get halfway to campus here, where we're all meeting, and I realize something. I have forgotten something. Now, it's not my toothbrush, as gross as that could be. I could do without that, and so... but it was my phone. Not my landline, my cell phone. And so, I know like for some of us it's like, not a big a deal, but even just 5 years ago that wouldn't have been a big deal, but now it's a very big deal. It's an even bigger deal because we're going to this place in Wisconsin, I think, and I think it's called Wisconsin Cells or something like that, or the Dells. I don't know where we're going. I know it's Wisconsin. I could not tell you. If there was $1 million online, I could not have told you what hotel or resort or thing we're going to. And I'm going, this isn't good. I whip the car around, and I take back off and down, trying to be like, hurry, but not like too much of a hurry because, there's still like black ice and there's traffic, there's police officers, there's all those kinds of things going through my head. And so, but my blood is starting to boil a little bit. You ever get in these spots, right, where it's like, it's not a big deal, but it's becoming a bigger deal because I don't want to miss this, and I've set aside time, and I don't want them to wait on me, and so I rush back, I fly through the neighborhood, I go into, at the appropriate speed, of course, and then drive into stop in the car, and get out of the car, run in the house, and Eric says, oh, good, you remembered your phone. And I was like, yeah, I'm late, and so I take the phone, and as I'm running out the door, she says, good news. Good news, let's hear that. The buses are late. I just got a phone call from Nick. The buses are late. Relief, right? Now, the reality is, I would have gotten my phone. I would have been able to call, Nick or Flo or someone else on the trip and figure out pretty fast where I was going, punch it in on my phone, and I would have figured it out. But isn't it funny with the smallest little things, how they can just get you so excitable, right? And how that blood-boiling frustration then can be, kind of give birth to anger. And when you're angry, even just 1%, you don't really think clearly, do you? Like, you don't think about all the practical things of like, I could just enter this in myself and drive up, you don't think clearly. And so we would call those kinds of things predictable anger. Predictable anger, is stuff like when it's supposed to work, and normally it works every day. 99% of the time, this stuff works until you really need it, right? Like the copier at your house, right? The printer. Or the copier at work, when you have the big presentation and you're going to your class and you have to have it, and then does it work when you really need it? No, it doesn't. And you bless that printer and you say all kinds of encouraging things to it and all kinds of, you massage it and, but it's not working. Or, what about, stuff that technology always works when you need it, right? Your phone gives out, your laptop crashes, the network goes down, your car. You don't want to be late because if you're late again, you're going to lose that job. It's frustrating. That's called predictable anger. Like everyone understands that, right? That's normal. But what we're going to talk about today is the other kind of anger. And when you think about anger, there's kind of a spectrum. There's a range of emotions attached to it, right? Like there's kind of like, stage one, if you will, over here on this side of the spectrum. There's just like, this basic anger. There's traffic, like traffic anger. Hopefully it doesn't give birth to road rage, but like that's like one type of anger, right? And then there's like the person that they're in customer service. The sign says customer service, but they're not giving you very good customer service. That makes you a little angry, right? And then there's like, the Blackhawks losing or stuff like that. That makes you angry. And then there's winter vortexes and you're kind of moving along here. And then it gets a little more serious, the emotions. It's stuff like your car breaks down and you don't have money to get it repaired. Or you slide on black ice and you shouldn't have been that close, but you did, and there's a level of anger there. Or someone smashed into you. That's another level of anger, right? Bless them. Doing the series on questionable living, I should not do anything questionable. Okay, so, the anger kind of goes, but then if someone wrongs you, right? They lie to you or they hurt the relationship with you, that's another degree, right, of anger. And if someone messes with your kids or hurts your kids, it's on, right? Out comes Mama Bear and Papa Bear, and that's another degree. And it's, again, these are justifiable. These are predictable, right? But then what we're talking about today is when it gets past here, like there's even one more degree is you may even be angry at God, right? Like you prayed a prayer, or he lets you down, and you're angry at him. And then there's way over here where we are today. There's stuff like kids starving in Africa and Haiti. There's poor around us. There's people who don't even have clean drinking water. So there's this whole spectrum of anger. And anger is a predictable emotion. But what we're going to talk about today is there anything questionable about our anger? And we're talking about that because we're in this series, we're in week 3 of the series called A Questionable Life. And so we've been talking about, right, is there anything in my life that evokes curiosity? The way I run my business, or the way I show up to work regularly, or the way I cart the kids around, or the way I'm a friend, or you fill in the blank. The way I parent my marriage, you can just go on and on. Because Jesus, his whole life, everywhere he went, people were like, why are you living that way? Why do you have integrity? Why do you have those kind of relationships? And the questions would come. And last week we said the question really was it circled around forgiveness. Why should I forgive? Because it looks like I'm weak and I don't want to lose, I want to win. And we talked about how funny it is. Really, it's not funny at all. It's ironic that the one actually losing is us. And so we've been talking about this. And so this week we're talking about questionable anger. What are the things that make Jesus angry? You think of Jesus getting angry, right? But this anger, or this questionable anger, it's synonymous with righteous anger, with holy anger. And so it's not over here on the spectrum of, winter vortexes and stuff like that, but it's over here. What do we do when there's whole people groups being left out? And the reason it's a challenge, and we're going to talk about how do we move on this scale from predictable anger to questionable anger. And the reason it's difficult is because predictable anger is predictable because it's about me, right? And we can all relate to it. We understand when the car breaks. We understand when the person cuts us off. We understand. We all lean in and we go, of course. But it's harder to think about these kinds of issues that make us angry because we don't look through it through that lens. We don't look through it through their lens. We look through it through our story because it's all we've ever known. So it's a real challenge. It's difficult. There's actually a term to help us to figure this out a little bit. How do I not just look through someone else's situation or story just through my own lens? And the phrase is actually, it's called the dual narrative dynamic. Out of curiosity, has anyone ever heard of that? That's good. One, maybe. Okay, you're the first person ever besides me to hear that. So, if I get it wrong, tell me. But the dual narrative, what it is, it's this exact thing that in every situation, narrative is just story, right? There's two stories. And so while it's easy to kind of go, well, maybe they should have done some things differently, what the person inside of it, they only see it from all they've ever known. They know that they didn't know that their mom and dad was going to leave them, they were going to be an orphan. They didn't know they were going to be born in that country. They didn't know fill in the blank. And so that's all they've ever known. But the other side of that narrative is everyone else looking in. Kind of going, you should do something. Man, you should. And there's the dual narrative. And our challenge is to say is, how do we go from the outside looking in to saying, how do I put myself here? How do I listen and understand and think, if that was me in their situation, how would it look to me? And it's difficult. But that's how we start moving into this questionable anger. That's how we start realizing, and Jesus is an expert at this, because he's all about restoring the Father's dream for the world. About making a new creation, about people finding their way back to God. And so in this story, if you have a Bible, we're in Matthew chapter 21. If you have a Bible or Bible app, turn there. In this whole series, we're camping out in Matthew, kind of looking at, there's these times over and over again where he has these questionable encounters. And today is all about questionable anger. And so he says this in Matthew chapter 21. We're going to see Jesus get a little bit frustrated and angry. Are you ready? If you're ready, say, yes, John, we're ready. Yes, John, we're ready. That was a good response. Okay, I was worried you guys starting to drift. Okay, good. All right, here we go. Verse 10. When Jesus entered Jerusalem, the whole city stirred and asked, who is this? Evoking curiosity in the way he lived. The crowd answered, this is Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth in Galilee. And Jesus entered the temple courts, and he drove out all who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables and the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. It's written, he said to them, my house will be called a house of prayer, but you're making it a den of robbers. The blind and the lame came to him at the temple, and he healed them. But when the chief priests and the teachers of the law saw the wonderful things that he did, and the children were shouting in the temple courts, Hosanna to the Son of David, they were indignant. Do you hear what these children are saying? They asked him. So Jesus goes on a little bit of a rampage here. He's upset about some stuff. This is what Erica calls to me. She says, when I get upset about things in a righteous way, she says, you're going a little Jersey Jesus. You got to simmer down, Jersey Jesus. So if I start getting a little too excited, you can be like, whoa, simmer down, Jersey Jesus, all right? And he's upset because we have to understand this isn't just like the temple isn't just like another church on the corner here. The temple is actually at the center of culture, not just of Judaism, although that is true. Back in biblical times, both in ancient Near East culture in the Old Testament and then in first century, when we see in the New Testament here, the temple would have been literally at the center of a town or a city. So even if it was a small synagogue like Nazareth, there would have been a little synagogue where Jesus was born, or grew up rather. There would have been something up the center. And even in the Old Testament, the temple, when they didn't have a physical structure yet, and there was just the tent, it was always at the middle, and the tribes would gather around it to show you are at the center of everything that we do, God. We want you to be at the center, and out of that, we live our lives. Sometimes you hear this kind of language, live from the inside out, we say kind of in our modern terms. And so the temple is at the middle of everything. And the temple is supposed to be this place where everyone can come. Now, even though it's specifically for the Jews, we're going to see here in a minute, it's actually open to the Gentiles and a multiple of different people as well. So Jesus is mad because it's a righteous anger, a holy anger, if you will, because it's a place intended to draw people to God, and instead it's becoming a place of corruption. And the hint lies there in verse 12. Did you see? He flips the tables, and who does he flip them on? Who are the guys sitting at the tables? It's the money changers. And you remember what they're selling? Doves. It seems like not a big deal, but here let me put a little context for a little history lesson here is that typically you wanted to offer something better. So whether you had a really big sin or then you bring in like a lamb, like that guy must have messed up. Look at the size of his lamb, but it was more about the quality of the offering. Like, I'm going to give God my best. But then for those, which there was quite a few, in Jerusalem, they couldn't afford things like that. So there would be doves. They would still be considered an acceptable sacrifice, but it was for something, considerably less money. And Jesus is getting really mad because these money changers are basically committing extortion. They are upcharging on the lowest level of sacrifice there is, and people are coming and they have to do it and they want to do it, and yet they're being excluded almost to the point where they can't, and he's angry. Another thing that's happening here is that he is seeing all this religious activity, but no real worship. And so let me break down the building. Here's a picture of the temple here. And so this will help us a little bit. I know this is actually going to be our new building plan. I just want to point that out. I think we should go back to that. It's in the winter, it's going to be awesome. Everything's going to be a little heated, everything. You love it. But this outer court here is called the Court of Gentiles. That's the big one near the wall. So pretty big area. So anybody can come, right? Gentiles were just non-Jews. And so that's where Jesus kind of starts things, right? But then the next level in is the court of women, the women's court. So if you were a Jewish woman, you could kind of go into the next layer, right? And then from there's a court for Jewish men called the court of Israel. And so if you're a Jewish man, you get another layer in. So you kind of see concentric circles. And then it goes to, that's what the next one is, where the priest could go. And then the largest white building there, that's the holy place. Inside of that is the Holy of Holies. So only the high priest, the priest for that year, the head honcho, could go in there and make the sacrifice for all the people. I'm summarizing a lot of Jewish history in a matter of seconds here, but you get the idea. Maybe it's simple to say it this way. Like, imagine if a community, we started saying, okay, all the men, you can sit here, first couple rows, all the way back as far as we need to. Then the women, and if you can't fit, women, you can stand in the back. But then if you're a visitor, or you're non-native Chicagoan, Chicagoland person, you're out in the lobby. And then after that layer of people, there's Cubs fans and Bears fans. Then there's White Sox fans. And then there's Packers fans. They're in the parking lot. And so, you kind of get where I'm going, right? Like, there's these different degrees. And it's kind of ridiculous to us. But you get the point that Jesus is mad because people are being excluded. There's whole people groups being excluded. But do you catch what happens in verse 14? Who comes up to him? The blind and the lame. I've never caught this before, just till I started looking at this message. And it was an interesting response. That's what makes people mad. And what's making them mad is because in this culture still, the blind and the lame and the mute, they were considered unclean. Like somehow that maybe their parents had messed up and it was their fault. And so we didn't want you in that, that area. You're going to mess up the system. It's not going to look good. So Jesus is indignant. He's mad. He's questionable anger. Mark's version says it this way. He says, "My temple will be called a house of prayer for all nations." But all nations weren't welcome. Scholar Michael Wilkins says it this way, that they are robbing God of the means by which his blessing extends to all nations. The temple's primary purpose was being lost in a frenzy of religious activity. God doesn't want there to be just a frenzy of activity. He wants us to live questionable lives. That we come out of that overflow of our heart, of that deep, deep love we have for him and the relationship we have with him. N.T. Wright says this about the exclusion of these various people groups. The people who had been kept out were now welcomed in. People who had been scorned were now healed. It was an action full of significance. And it summed up everything that Jesus had been doing in his ministry. The context is, by the way, this is the week, the Passion Week, if you will, of when Jesus is going to the cross. And so he actually models what he wants us to do, how he wants us to interact with people in the rest of the subsequent chapters leading up to the crucifixion and the resurrection. It's really interesting. And this is kind of how we've taken our playbook on, when you hear these kind of things, you kind of wonder, how do I respond? What do I do? And so we have kind of 3 levels, if you will, that together make a comprehensive response when we see injustice happening. Because we don't want to just become paralyzed, right? What do we do? How do we respond? How do we live questionable lives? How do we exercise this questionable anger? And so here at Community, here's our three strategies, if you will. A level 1 response is called a charitable response. And this is something that this is designed just to meet basic needs. So this is through our benevolence ministry or food drives, or maybe your small group, got coats for the homeless during Christmas season. It's also our gift mart. That's one of the main things we do there. Gift mart is something we do where we sell toys at a considerably discounted price to bring dignity to folks who are underprivileged and still want to have a great Christmas. And so many of you were involved with that. Actually, we helped we had 8 schools in the East Aurora and Joliet area that we were able to partner with, and raised almost $19,000 that went right back into those schools, helped over 4,500 families, and had 700 volunteers just like you. Many of you did that. It's a level 1 response. It's awesome. It's a win on multiple levels, right? Because it's a win for the people there, because they're like, wow, it's great, I can still have Christmas. And they experience firsthand the love of Jesus through conversations, through prayers we're having. It's a win for us because we get to actually serve and do something. And it's a win for the local school districts because they get the money back and get to pour it back in and help. But it's only a level 1 response. It's a good start. But then from there, we challenge people to a level 2, which is individual development. This is designed to help people kind of with their own needs. How do they start kind of learning to feed for themselves, if you will, instead of just us handing them the fish kind of thing. And so these examples of this are tutoring and mentoring, sponsoring children. We sponsored at the church all of Community, over 600 kids this fall through Compassion International. 20 of those were just right here. Many of you already have done that before. That's a great way to dive into level 2 response to injustice. We have a small group that their mission, and by the way, this small group commissioning next week is going to give you a chance to dive into a group if you're not in one, and you're going to see everyone up here, and so you can jump in. But we encourage every group to have a mission, have a purpose, more than just, hey, we're going to gather and hang out. And one of the small groups' mission is that they have a community garden here on site, and then they use that food, and they go and they use it for the local food pantry. That's an awesome thing. That's a level 2 response. We have many of you that are involved with foster care. You're diving deep. It takes longer to build these kind of relationships, but then the result also lasts a lot longer too. The impact is greater. Many of you are involved with foster care and even adopting, whether domestically or internationally, and that's huge. The level 3 response then is when you start thinking more in terms of community development and advocacy. That's things like maybe you join the school board, or you become part of your local village or your town, or maybe even your HOA, your homeowner association. Maybe there's a place to dive in there to start making some bigger changes. And maybe the best way to think about that would be something like, in the Fox River just over here, right? If you saw a baby floating down the river, what would you do? What should you do? Man, you guys are heartless, man. You should grab the baby if you don't know that, right? Like, you see a baby floating by, just in every situation, you grab the baby. You don't have to know how you're going to do all the things, but you should grab the baby. And so, I grabbed the baby. Then you see another baby, you're like, I guess he had a brother, and so you grab that baby, and now you got 2 babies, and there's a third one. Man, triplets? What are the odds? And so you grab a third one. And by the 4th and the 5th baby that you're holding now, all these little kids and these little babies in your hand, it's not enough just to hold a bunch of babies. You got to go upstream and say, who's throwing all the babies in the water up here? Where are they coming from? That's a level 3 response. A level 3 response is, I want to get to the root of the issue. Because it's not enough just to kind of take away some of the symptoms. Although they're significant. This is say, how do I make a larger scale change? What do I do? And you start asking questions like, what would it look like for Jesus to have questionable anger in this scenario? What's a Christ-like response to poverty, to injustice, to single moms, to whatever it is that is welling up inside of you, that's boiling to a point of anger in a healthy way? So How do you need these levels, these strategies give us ways to move? Some of us, it's great to be a level 1 participant. Or maybe you don't even do that. It's great to give once a year in Celebration Generosity or in Gift Mart. But I'd say God would challenge you today, say it's time to move to level 2. It's time to pour into someone's life, to mentor, maybe with Triple Threat or other organizations like that. Maybe some of you, maybe you're at a place where you just retired from work, or the kids left the house, or something like that, and now you're like, I've got some time, I could be on the school board. Or I could sit on the town council. I could be the village president. Who knows? Maybe it's time for you to take that kind of step. But here's what we know. When we look at the story of Jesus in the temple, his passion, his questionable anger led him to do something. And the rest of his ministry was marked by that. His whole ministry was marked by that. So that's how I want to end today. I want to end by challenging us to do something, to engage in one of these 3 levels. And the way I want to do that is I'm going to throw out some categories and some numbers. And I hope that it does something in you. I hope something wells up inside of you where you kind of go, yeah, there's some questionable anger there. That's not right. First category. When you think about domestic abuse, any abuse, does your heart twinge a little bit? Does it break? Does it get a little bit upset? What about just teens cutting themselves because they have poor body image? Because they've been told they're not beautiful, maybe. Does that do anything? Questionable anger maybe for you. How about the need for all the foster children, the thousands of kids in the Chicagoland area? Maybe God's saying, take a step of questionable anger, get involved, be a foster parent. I don't know. Is that questionable anger for you? Maybe he's saying it's time to take that step of questionable anger and mentor some children. Maybe you can't fully do the foster thing, so he's saying, you know what? Your story matches up with a lot of kids. Why don't you jump in with Triple Threat or other programs like that where you could coach, or you could mentor, or you could help them in the arts. You could change a student's life, a child's life. What about fatherlessness? Does that stir up anything in you? Let me give you some more info on that. This is an area that I'm passionate about, and I'm trying to figure out what to do with it. Do you know that children who are fatherless are 5 times more likely to commit suicide? They're 20 times more likely to end up in prison. 63% of all youth who commit suicide are from fatherless homes. 75% of adolescents that are doing drugs and end up in drug rehab centers are from fatherless homes. And 90% of the homeless population, you can guess, is from a fatherless home. How about this one? Do you know what the second largest crime industry in the whole world is? Only behind drugs. Trafficking. Human trafficking. Did you know that Chicago is considered an international hub for both labor and sex trafficking? Does that stir anything up in you? Is there anything questionable? Are you starting to feel the blood boiling? You're moving just from predictable anger? You're going across the scale and you're getting closer to questionable anger? And even just a few years ago, it wasn't as big a deal. A lot of times we just think of the city, it's them, it's the downtown Chicagoans, That's well monitored and well documented, the police and all that kind of stuff. And so what's happened now is moved to the suburbs. Did you know that's where the majority of sex trafficking and slavery is actually taking place? Human trafficking is happening. It's in our suburbs right here. And a lot of times the way it happens is actually through online gaming of our children, social media outlets. And again, it's linked to this idea of broken homes, where what the person does, the predator, they build this empathy, this relationship with the child on the other side. I know what it's like. Oh, it's terrible. You know what? We should meet. I'll buy you lunch. I just want to love on you. And they meet up and they become a victim. That happens right here in Montgomery, Aurora, and Oswego. How about the number 27? Do you know what that represents? 27 million. 27 million is the number of people that are in slavery today. It affects every country in the world. That's more people in slavery today, whether through labor or sex trafficking, than any other time in human history. Isn't that mind-boggling? This is supposed to be the most freeing time in history, right? We've never had more rights. We've never had more technology. We've never had more information. 27 million. And every 30 seconds, someone becomes a slave. That was only 15 seconds. You feel that weight? I'm not trying to be a downer. I want to create some questionable anger in you and me. Something welling up inside of you that says, I got to do something. Places like International Justice Mission are doing great things for trafficking. Christine Caine and her campaign it's called A21 to abolish slavery in the 21st century, or our very own Chris Baker and Inc. 180 are all great organizations to dive in and help with those things. This may be most disturbing of all. Do you know what the number 12 represents? 12 is the average age of a sex slave. That's not right. Edmund Burke says this: the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. What if that was your son, your daughter, your niece, your nephew, your grandchild, your brother, your sister? What would you do? You'd do anything. It's not God's dream for the world at all. He says, I want to use you. Jesus says, this is what I want us to do. Luke 4. He says, the Spirit of the Lord is on me because He's anointed me to proclaim the good news to the poor, to proclaim the freedom for prisoners, to recovery sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, and proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. He came to bring good news, friends. He says, I want to do that in you and through you. If you're a Christ follower, I'm going to let you tap in to my power, to my Holy Spirit. I'm going to put it in you. And like our blast theme, I'm going to unleash you. I don't want you to just come and sit in these chairs. They're not that comfortable. That's on purpose because we want you to get out there. We want you to live questionable lives. I want to live a questionable life. Not just talk about it. I want to have questionable anger. I want to get fired up about the things that God gets fired about. I want my heart to break with the things that break His. And then people go, why do you care? It's not even your kid. It's not even the homeless guy. You don't even know him. And we get a chance to share the difference Jesus makes in our lives. So maybe you need to respond one of those three levels. I would challenge, I think you do. But I have a friend, he says this: whatever you do, don't do nothing. And there's a temptation when we hear a message like this to kind of respond in one of three ways. And one is we kind of overhear and we just, there's some here. I get it. It's just not getting, it's not hitting you. It's going to just bounce off. Then there's some here. You're just like, I'm so overwhelmed by all that. I don't even know where to begin. And then there's another camp that'll just say, someone else would do it. And I believe Jesus says, no, I want you and you and you and you to have questionable anger. And many of you are already. Dive in. Dive deeper. Because when you have that questionable anger, and you develop that, I think Jesus would say, whatever you do, don't do nothing. Let's pray together. Father, this was less than a light topic today, but it's one that affects our world in a very real way. Would you nudge us, God, through the power of your Holy Spirit, how to respond? How do we dive into one of these three levels, God? Or maybe there's another way that you're speaking to us right now where we need to dive in and have some questionable anger in our lives. Maybe it's mentoring. Maybe it's coaching. Maybe it's forgiving for the first time. Whatever it is, God, we want to respond. God, I believe there's even some here today that they don't have questionable anger because they're still just angry at you. They still have a hang up there. And God, I pray that they would just, even now, if that's you, would you just give that anger to God? You don't have to solve it. You don't have to answer all the questions yet. But maybe just pray this simple prayer of, God, I'm angry. I've been angry for a long time. But I want you to come in and take that away. I want to be the kind of man, the kind of woman that lives a questionable life, that has this questionable anger you're talking about. Just invite him in. Jesus is gracious. He'll walk with you slowly but surely and address those things, and he'll bring healing. So whatever your response is, just do what Jesus is asking you to do. In your name, amen.